There's a point where explaining becomes over-explaining, and where over-explaining stops being communication and starts becoming proof-seeking. That sounds obvious when somebody else is doing it. It gets considerably harder to recognize when you're the one adding the fourth paragraph because apparently sentence one needed a legal representation. Leaders don't build from validation. They build from conviction and let validation echo later. Easy enough to say when the room is full. People are buying, the comments are coming in, the numbers are moving, and the internet essentially standing there holding a giant sign that says, "Yes, Dawn, keep going. You are doing it right." Very comforting. Leadership gets considerably more interesting when the room is quiet and you can hear a pin drop. For months, I kept telling myself I was going to get ahead on my newsletter. I was going to batch several issues, schedule them, build this beautiful content bank so future Dawn would never again be sitting at a laptop thinking, how the fuck is it newsletter day again? And every week there I was, writing from real life, not planning for 6 months ahead or 6 weeks ahead or a perfectly batched section. I certainly wasn't embodying the hyper-organized version of myself who apparently lives in another dimension with better lighting, color-coded planner, and absolutely no life interruptions. And yes, that's a pattern. But eventually I realized there was another pattern underneath it, because despite not doing it the perfect way, I had still shown the freak up every week through travel, business pivots, healing my eye, life changing around me, environment changing, weeks where I genuinely wondered whether anybody was even reading. There wasn't some giant explosion happening around the publication yet, no massive audience or flooded paid subscribers, and certainly no internet collectively announcing, "Dawn Reed, we finally understand exactly what you're building." And yet I kept writing. My voice was getting clearer. The philosophy was getting stronger. The archive was growing. The body of work was becoming something substantial. And then it hit me. I was looking outside myself for evidence of something my own consistency had already proven. Yep, that's what I call the proof pattern. And that sneaky little pattern does not always look like insecurity. It looks extremely responsible most of the time. You check the metrics again, change the CTA, rewrite the offer, add another paragraph because maybe they didn't understand, give 5 more reasons, the price makes sense, explain the decision after the decision has already been made, defend the pivot, soften the boundary, add context nobody requested. Try to make absolutely certain everybody understands your intention before you give yourself permission to move. And eventually you have to ask, am I actually communicating more clearly, or am I trying to control how I'm being perceived? Because those are not the same thing. That is where over-explaining becomes a leadership leak. A clean decision sounds different from a decision begging for approval. A clean boundary sounds different from a boundary followed by 4 paragraphs explaining why you're still a nice person. A clean offer sounds different from an offer buried underneath 17 reasons why it's worth the price. And a clean pivot sounds very different from, I know this might sound confusing, so here is the complete archaeological record of every thought I've had since 2019 that led to this decision. The truth was already clear in sentence 1. Everything after it was proof. I know this because I've done versions of it myself. You make a decision. You know why. You can feel that it was right. Then, the second somebody else might see it, your mind starts building the case. Why it makes sense. Why you're qualified. Why now. Why you changed your mind. Why changing direction doesn't mean the old direction was wrong or misguided. Why you're not being irresponsible. Why everybody should understand. Conviction makes the move. The proof pattern writes the defense brief afterward. Now, before somebody hears this and decides I'm suggesting we throw analytics into the river and run our businesses exclusively by moonlight, no. Yes, all the data matters. Feedback, metrics, business needs information. But information and validation are not the same thing, and they need to be treated as such. The numbers can tell you whether somebody clicked, whether they watched or how long they watched, whether they bought, whether they left. That is all useful information, but it is external response. If it becomes the only evidence you trust, you will abandon powerful work before it has enough time to become anything. My newsletter became a perfect example of this. From one angle, somebody could look at a small subscriber count and say, not much is happening yet. But that would completely miss what was actually being built. Consistency, language, positioning, a philosophy, an archive, searchable intellectual property, a trust trail, a place where somebody can binge read my thinking before we even speak. And maybe most importantly, I was becoming more comfortable standing publicly inside my own work. That is not nothing. The market is still catching up to evidence you've already become. And if you require the crowd to arrive before you're willing to honor that becoming, you've just handed the crowd entirely way too much authority. The proof pattern shows up everywhere once you know what you're looking for. You publish something and immediately check whether anybody responded. You put an offer out into the world and change it 3 days later because nobody bought it yet. You post consistently for 2 weeks, don't go viral, and suddenly we're holding a funeral for the entire freaking strategy. You say no, and then spend 45 minutes composing the constitution of why Dawn said no. You raise the price and immediately add more deliverables because the number made you feel uncomfortable. You make a decision and then ask 5 people whether they think it's the right decision. And eventually, you're no longer sure whether you're adjusting intelligently or simply trying to make uncertainty stop feeling uncomfortable. Those are very different moves. Technology can pour gasoline on this pattern because there is always another source of feedback available, another dashboard, another optimization score, another AI tool, analytics screen, another platform, another metric, another shiny thing willing to answer, is this good enough yet? And obviously, I love technology when it gives me leverage. Hell, I'm currently building a system where one long form video gets chopped into multiple pieces and distributed while I'm somewhere outside with bourbon instead of manually editing all the shit myself every damn day. That's technology earning its seat. But the question underneath the tool still matters. Is this expanding my work, or am I asking the tool to validate my work before I trust myself? Same software, completely different outcomes and patterns. The right tool reduces labor. The wrong motive outsources self-trust. And that gets expensive when you're leading, because proving costs energy, over-explaining costs energy, constantly trying to manage everybody else's interpretation of you costs energy. And that energy comes directly out of your clarity, presence, and decisiveness, and the ability to move without taking a public vote first. Think about how much cleaner leadership becomes when you stop believing every decision needs a defense. You can say, "This is what we're doing," and stop talking, rather than This is what we're doing, and here are 14 reasons why, and I hope everybody understood. You can say, this offer no longer belongs in the business. I'm changing delivery model. That boundary doesn't work anymore. This is the price. No. And then stop talking. I know, radical fucking concept, right? Let's use an analogy. I love being in nature. Nature is exceptionally good at demonstrating this. The mountains here in Idaho do not explain themselves. You can feel their energy. They don't adjust their shape because somebody drove by without appreciating them. They don't shout from the mountaintops, 5 reasons mountains still provide value in 2026. They stand. And because they stand, you feel them. There is a kind of leadership that works like that, with presence, with conviction, holding your shape long enough for the world to actually encounter you before you redesign yourself based on the first reaction. Anyone can feel certain once the evidence is overwhelming. Most people have to see before they believe. You are being asked to believe before you see. The better question is, can you keep building while the room is still quiet? Can you honor 10 people without dismissing them because they aren't 10,000? Can you leave an offer alone long enough to actually learn whether it works? Can you let the newsletter become an asset before demanding that it immediately become revenue? Can you make a clean decision and allow somebody else to misunderstand it? Can you stop explaining simply because silence makes you nervous? Can you lead before validation arrives? That is where conviction actually gets built. And conviction doesn't mean ignoring evidence. It means you stop asking evidence to perform a job it cannot do. Metrics cannot decide whether your work matters. They cannot decide whether a season is changing you in ways the numbers haven't caught up with yet. They cannot tell you whether an idea deserves more time. And they definitely cannot become the authority deciding whether you trust your own voice. So here's the practical pattern break. Think about one place where you're currently over-explaining. Is it in an offer, a decision, a boundary, pivot, a price, a conversation? Now strip it all the way back and ask, what was the clean truth before I started adding proof? Write that sentence. One sentence. That's it. No defense, no extra opening statement for the freaking jury. Then ask, what am I afraid somebody will think if I let that sentence stand on its own? That's where the pattern gets interesting. Maybe you're afraid they'll think you're selfish, unqualified, too expensive, inconsistent, too much, not enough, difficult, that you're changing your mind again, that you don't care. And suddenly the extra paragraphs begin to make sense. You're not necessarily clarifying anymore. You're trying to prevent another human being from having a perception you cannot control. That is an exhausting job, and I am giving you permission to resign immediately. One of the biggest shifts in my own work has been realizing that I don't need everybody else to understand the move before I make it. I am the one who needs to understand the move. I'm the one who needs that relevant information. I need to recognize the pattern underneath the pattern. I need to make that clean decision. Then the evidence can accumulate afterward. That's what I mean when I say leaders don't build from validation. They build from conviction and let that validation echo later. Believing before seeing. Look at what is actually happening. So if your room feels quiet right now, don't automatically turn the silence into evidence against yourself. Look deeper. Are you clearer? Is your voice stronger? Is the work deeper? Are your decisions cleaner? Are you more consistent now? Are you creating assets instead of constantly creating disposable posts? Are the conversations getting better? Are you building something you would still respect, even if the applause arrives 6 months down the road? Because proving drains. Embodiment compounds. The strongest leadership move available to you isn't another explanation. Say the true thing once and let it stand. The full written piece lives over on my Substack, where I go deeper into the proof pattern across metrics, technology, leadership, business, and the nervous system. Are you currently over-explaining, proving, checking, second-guessing, or needing external validation and letting it affect the way you lead? That is exactly the kind of pattern we look underneath inside Pattern Break Advisory, because behavior usually isn't the whole problem. Underneath it is asking for proof. And once we identify that, we can make a much cleaner move while the pattern is actually alive. Pattern interruption. Leadership does not require everybody to understand you before you move. You say the true thing once, let the echo arrive when it arrives. Subscribe here on YouTube. Be sure to turn on those notifications. Then head over to my Substack and do the same over there. All links are below in the description.